Welcome to another episode of the Wood Couture Podcast. Today we have the absolute privilege to have Matthew Berman, the principal and founder of workshop APD from New York. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you very much, Filippo.
We are very excited.
I'm glad we made this happen.
Absolutely. So let's dive into it. And so the curiosity to everybody that watches our show, they want to know at what point in life did you decide I want to be in the design industry?
From what I'm told, it was before I can remember. I think my parents predicted that I was going to be an architect from when I was a very young age. I had a curiosity about how things went together. And they tell stories about I used to take things apart, small appliances, weird things. I would just start taking things apart to see how they worked. And I assume I put them back together. I have no idea. I don't remember living in a house with like scattered pieces everywhere. But yeah, I think I was always interested in architecture and design from a young age. I grew up in Connecticut, sort of right next to New York, and my parents are both from New York. And so we would take trips into the city, see my grandparents, see family, see culture, and they would take me to the old Museum of Modern Art. And if you remember the old Museum of Modern Art building, the architecture and design floor was sort of on the fifth floor, almost in the attic of the building. It was very, very, very tucked away and not celebrated the way it is today. But I would go up into that. It was really a room or maybe two rooms that had drawings and models, and I was just fascinated by the models. So I think they predicted from a very early age that was the path I was going to take.
Yeah. You went straight into owning your own company together with your partners, and why is that, and not going and working for other people?
Who the hell knows? No, I think the other founding partner, a guy named Andrew Kotchin, and I went to college together. In fact, actually, all three of us went to college together. My other partner as well, and Andrew and I were in college together. We're very good friends in college, and then stayed friends through grad school, even though we went our separate ways. And I think we both kind of stoked something in each other. I think that we maintained a very healthy conversation about architecture. I think we were always each other's kind of architectural wingman, kind of growing up at that age. And we're always interested in kind of in pursuing architecture and design and talking about it and sort of fostering each other's, at that time, independent paths. Our Andrew had really kind of started. He finished grad school before I did, had started actually working in a few firms, and then had an opportunity to go out on his own. I was still in grad school. And it was just fun to see him flourish. And, it never seemed that risky. And so when I graduated, I had a few projects also, and we sort of sat down and said, let's make something of it. It's really interesting. People are always sort of like, how did you do it? Right? How did you do it at such a young age? I think we were about 28. And the answer is not that complicated, to be honest. The answer is actually pretty simple. At that time, we had no liability. We had no risk. Right? We had no children. We weren't married. We were living, a pretty easy, free life. We just had to cover our rent and put food on the table and that sort of thing. And so I think for us, the worst that could happen, the absolute worst that could happen, was that we went out and got jobs, right? How terrible is that? We had to get a job, and we were in New York, so we would work for maybe a cool firm or a cool architect or something like that. So we did it, but it wasn't terribly complicated. We networked, we put ourselves out there, we really pushed everyone we knew to hope, put us in touch with anyone they could think of who might need some work early on. And we were pretty scrappy, but other than that, it sort of took off from there, and we steadily grew from 2 people to 4 to 6. I think we were probably 6 or 8 in the first year, and then grew from there.
So out of curiosity, did you guys sit down one day and say, let's have a business plan, or you just gone with that?
No, we did not really have a business plan per se. I think we both are business savvy enough. We certainly made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I think we both, we had a sense of what we needed to do. At the end of the day, the two most important things were doing good work and getting new clients. Right? We had to continue to bring in new work. So I think we were both very mindful of that. And then the rest of the stuff, sort of came. We figured out how to do our own books. We got QuickBooks. We sort of figured it out. We never really had quite a business plan or even much of an operating agreement. We sort of just kind of grew organically, and then over time have brought in incredibly smart advisors and people who are sort of way smarter than us in their particular fields, who can give us help and advise us on how to conduct business, especially now that we're a bit larger. We're almost 100 people, so now we really do need the advice of some solid professionals who can help guide us and give us information and that sort of thing.
Well, look, when you guys started, obviously after graduations, who did you look up as an inspiration? Who inspired you in the design industry or in the artistic industry? Who did you look up to?
It was an interesting time. It was right around the millennia, so it was right around 1999, 2000, and I think it's funny, but architecture and architectural discourse has evolved quite a bit since then. But back in that time, I had taken a slightly different path to practice. I had actually taken some time off from grad school and went into architectural journalism, and was working for a publication. It was a very theoretical, kind of very high-minded publication that was studying the state of the art, the state of architecture at the end of the millennium. So it was a think tank project from 1990 to 2000 that was working with all of the signature architects, all the starchitects. It was a project that was started by Cynthia Davidson and Peter Eisenman, again, sort of very, very known people in the architectural world. And they brought in a whole host of contemporaries: Rem Koolhaas and Libeskind, Zaha Hadid, Bernard Schumi, Phyllis Lambert, just a lot of people who are really the stars, or the former stars. I hate to say that, but in our profession. And then they would partner with a lot of people around the world in more local places. So they did events in Turkey and Buenos Aires and Seoul, Korea, and they would really come together with a lot of sort of local sociologists and historians and economists to talk about the state of architecture, right, in that location and then worldwide. So it was a fascinating conversation to be a part of for me, especially at such a young age. I was surrounded by these luminaries. And so to answer your question, I think that was the world I was coming out of. So I was seeing the questions they were asking. I was seeing what they were doing. I was seeing the arguments they were making. And I think at that time, architecture was still very much influenced by them, by what they were doing. I think it's evolved now quite a bit since then. But I think that at the time, very involved and inspired by that discourse. Now, that wasn't necessarily what we ended up pursuing as a practice, but there was still always that desire to question, that desire to sort of think more deeply about something. And I think we've always done that.
It sounds like the three of you, when started, and then you just loved what you did, and you still loving what you're doing. As opposed to the traditional scripted. Here's the business plan. Let's get. Here's all that. We just go on with that. Love what you're doing, and then things happens. And
we've really tried to do just what feels right for us. We're a little bit of a unicorn in that way. I think a lot of firms are very specialized, right? You have, obviously, in our world, the hospitality firms that really only do hospitality, clearly have a lot of residential firms. You have firms that specialize in healthcare and transportation and sports complexes and things like that. We started out as a residential firm, believe it or not. That's really where we cut our teeth. And then that is still an enormous chunk of our business, enormous sort of core of who we are, working really in the luxury residential world, all over the world now, working on just amazing houses and apartments and compounds and things like that. That grew into multifamily residential, which was luxury multifamily. And then that ultimately grew really over the past 7 years into luxury hospitality. And then ultimately into product design. And so people maybe oftentimes silo us. They know us as let's say a hospitality interior designer, but we are actually a full service architecture firm. So we do a lot of ground up work, and then we carry that over into interior architecture and into interior design and FF&E and product design. And we're working, like I said, in all of those other verticals as well. So to us, it's a little messy, right? Design is messy. It's supposed to be. But we also see a tremendous amount of overlap. Our ultra net worth residential clients are staying at the luxury properties that inspire us and that we design. The properties that we work for, the brands that we work for on the hospitality side are trying to cater really to our single family clientele. So there's a tremendous overlap. We don't really see it as different verticals or different worlds. We see it as one messy sandbox.
Yeah, and if I read correctly, in 2006, you guys won a very big competition initiated by Brad Pitt, on the Hurricane Katrina, and how does it feel among all the participants be the winner, and particularly with a figure like Brad Pitt that, everybody knows it, everybody knows it.
Everyone knew it. I mean, it's not often that architects are covered in People magazine, right? Yeah. It's sort of a weird venue to be in, but we were in People. It was amazing. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. It was a time. It was we were young in our career. We had been doing a lot of residential work in New York City and in the Northeast, and when the hurricanes happened, and I think when we all saw those pictures of devastation, you wanted to do something, right? You didn't know what to do. I mean, you didn't really have much of a choice. You could write a check, right? Obviously, and help support sort of the humanitarian efforts. People traveled down there to help clean up debris. Again, it's an amazing thing for someone to do and take their time and do that. I think as an architect, you really felt a little bit handcuffed, because there wasn't much you could do. And interestingly, when we saw all the images come out of New Orleans, you saw really two things. You saw the human toll, right? You'll never forget those images, the toll it took on people. And then you saw, obviously, the destruction on the environment, right? You saw how devastating it was. And so, certainly not downplaying the human toll, but as an architect, you did just see all of this destruction. And so there was a desire to do something. And so when those early competitions came out, there were actually two. One was an ideas only competition that was sponsored by a magazine. And we actually ended up being one of the 3 finalists in that. And that started to get us to think about, how do you build smarter? How do you build in a more thoughtful way? How do we take what we know about how people live, because that's what we had been doing and designing homes and apartments and things like that. And how do you take that and mobilize that in a way that, is a way to rethink what we do and how we live, and then especially in an area like New Orleans, where aside from the physical destruction, has a very long and complicated history, political history, social history, and so you're talking about rebuilding in areas that these sort of areas that were hurt the most were often the areas that were the poorest, and areas that were developed really kind of after the 1950s, areas that many planners would say should not be developed or should not have been developed, just because of where they sit physically and because of the risk. But ultimately, people did settle there, and so now, 50 years later, 60 years later, you can't go back and kick those people out. That's home to those people, right? So whether they should have been there or not from the beginning is irrelevant. Now they're there, and so the question is, how do you build smarter? So we went into that competition really with this incredible enthusiasm of we're going to kind of rethink this. And we came in and we, at the time, I think our studio was, I don't know, maybe 12, 18 people. And it was all hands on deck, put all the efforts into it, and really created, a compelling plan that really talked about how people live. And in fact, we came up with this idea of live, work, play, that it was a space that you weren't just living, but that you were potentially also working in and thinking about early co-working and play, right? How do you sort of bring joy to other aspects of your life? We submitted, obviously we had these beautiful boards. We made a presentation. We made a presentation actually before the local community as well, and then ended up winning. And of course, Brad Pitt came out and talked to us, and we met him, and he was a super nice guy and very very forthright, very earnest in his desire to do right. So it was a really important moment in our career. It sort of launched us not only more publicly, but it sort of took our work out of just the single family residential world. And because there were some multifamily components and a community center component to that design, it gave us a little bit of a platform to start pushing into larger scale work.
Wow, that's an incredible story. But listening to you, the passion, the way you're describing things is incredible, because any interview you always gave, you always says one very consistent thing, and this as follows: no matter what we are designing, but there is a unifying creative concept, a narrative, and a relationship between materials and forms. You always say this in every interview for the past 10 years, which is so consistent, but I can see it from the way you're describing this, this competition. But I would like you to expand more about the relationship between material and forms, because not many people think about that enough.
It's interesting. I think because we started our practice working in two very specifically defined vernaculars. We started working in New York City and Nantucket. Nantucket, an island off the coast of Massachusetts, now a destination for the wealthy, has a beautiful historic character, and is very heavily regulated. Right, so the whole island is on what's called the National Register of Historic Places. The entire island is governed by a historic design commission that reviews everything that's built on the island. Now, they don't control what's done on the inside, but on the outside, it's very heavily regulated, down to the material that's on the side of the house, the colors of the trim and the door, the types of roofing, the types of massing, things like that. So, and then you take New York City also. A lot of our work was in pre-war buildings. Pre-war buildings have a language of their own. They have we've all seen pictures of the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side of these buildings. A very, very strong organizational scheme and a very strong language. And so for us, especially as young architects, scrappy, we were taking work, we are definitely a more modern architect. We're a more progressive architect. Certainly not a classic or a traditional architect, but we're working in these two areas that are so steeped in history and that have, very, very clear identities. So for us, it really became a way of thinking about how do we get into the mindset of these two very different worlds with something that is our own lens. And that really came through materiality and detailing and the connections between things. So that's why, I think if you look at our work, I don't think anybody would ever say that it looks the same, right? No two projects look the same. We're not a signature architect with a signature style where we, stamp out the same thing over and over. We really come to each project with a very sort of open mind, but what we're bringing to it is a love of materiality, a love of craft, a love of form, and then how you bring those things together to create really interesting relationships. That lens, I think, is what you'll find is consistent in all of our work.
Wow. And I wanted to ask you, you also, I like another sentence, there is also in your bio, a passion for perfectly imperfect material. Wow, I was like, gosh, I love that. Why is that?
That probably comes out of 50 years of therapy. I think the reality is we architects in general, designers in general, strive for perfection, right? We all draw things perfectly. In the drawing, in the rendering, the world is perfect. The world is perfect. It hasn't been influenced by supply chains, by product issues, by irregularities, by all of these things that complicate perfection. And so I think over time, we've really learned to lean into imperfection. Imperfection is actually beauty. And so when we think about the craft side of something, the craft side of something means it's the hand of the maker. And the hand is imperfect. And so when you look at, when you look at materiality, the wood, for example, that's behind you, it's imperfect, right? There are knots in it, there's character in it, it's not uniform. But in that imperfection is perfection, is beauty. And so I think we think about that idea of imperfection, about something that sort of is very well thought through, but embraces irregularities, embraces things that begin to question that idea of perfection. I think perfection maybe can be a little bit stilted or a little bit stunted or boring. So I think when you bring in imperfection, it means that you've got sort of a yin and a yang, or a point and a counterpoint, right? Something to look at perfection against is imperfection. And when the two come together, you find that you create really meaningful spaces.
Talking about making a better world, not a perfect world, but let's talk about sustainability. And I want to hear your opinion, because I was shocked that we interviewed more than 50 to 60 people in our podcast, and a lot of them, they reckon that out of 10 tenders, 8 of them does not include a comprehensive brief about sustainability. Do you find that in the case for you? Do you get asked about sustainability nowadays as much as you should?
Yeah, no, you don't. Sustainability, gosh, it's a tough thing to really crack. I think that, let me start by saying, the architecture and design world wants to do a better job. I've never met an architect or a designer that disagrees with the foundation of the principles of sustainability, right? No, I think we all want to do a better job. Oftentimes our hands are tied by the things that are outside of our control. Oftentimes the client's interests. And it's not to say that clients are uninterested in it either. They are, and we certainly have many clients that are interested in it. But you're talking about clients that want to go above and beyond what is required. And to go above and beyond oftentimes means things are going to cost more. So you have to have a client that understands the big picture, that's invested in something for a long term, where they may see the benefits on that investment, and is willing to to take those leaps. I think, unfortunately, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with this, I know this is going to sound highly controversial, but the reason where we are even today with energy codes and things like that is because governments have mandated them, right? We have, whether you're in Dubai like you are, or New York City, or China, the regulations to build a building are very high, or the expectations. You can't build an inefficient building in most of the world today, right? Regardless of where you are in the world. The energy codes mandate an efficient building, which means you have efficient HVAC systems, you have efficient lighting systems, you have really good glazing systems and sort of exterior wall assemblies and things like that. You're building an efficient envelope. That's because of government regulation, right? Now, most developers are not going to go that extra mile and would not have gone that extra mile if they didn't have to. Because at the end of the day, they want to build for as little as possible in order to maximize the return. Again, nothing wrong with that. It's just counter to the goals of sustainability. So today we are building smarter houses, smarter buildings, smarter airports, you name it. All of it is much, much smarter. That regulation has not carried to the interiors, right? So you look at the interior industry, and you look at things like carpeting, right? Floor covering. 90%, I think over 90% of the floor covering in this world is made from a petroleum-based product, right? It's a PET product, over 90%. And so if you think of the hotel industry alone, hotels typically have to go through a 7 to 10 year property improvement plan, right? Where they're required by the brand, by the operators to refresh all of their spaces, certainly the public spaces, every 7 to 10 years, guest rooms as well. So what does that mean? That means that all of those goods are ripped out and thrown away, thrown into a landfill. So hundreds of thousands of square feet of carpeting, and case goods and all of these things are thrown out and thrown into a landfill. That is because it's mandated, right? The brands are mandating a 7 to 10 year improvement plan. Ownership wants to keep things fresh. And we don't have any kind of mandate, any kind of governmental mandate that says this product can't go into a landfill. This product needs to be recyclable. This product needs to be X, Y, and Z. We just don't have that yet. And so, I think what I said, a lot of people are gonna take issue with this, but ultimately I think that without any kind of government oversight, government mandate, the way that they've done on the architectural shell side, we're not really going to see substantial and meaningful changes for sustainability purposes on the building interiors.
I agree with you. Unless it's mandated, it's very hard to take an initiative because you're always going to be challenged by also budgeting. People budget to do things right.
That's right. And you have to answer to investors. You have to answer to your boards. Oftentimes, even when you think about the hotel world, the developer that builds the hotel often sells the hotel right after it's completed. So they build it, they maximize their return, they sell it to someone else. Now someone owns it, it's part of their portfolio, right? So the person who built it isn't incentivized to invest a lot more. The person who owns it is reporting to maybe a larger corporation or a board of directors and is really trying to keep that revenue. So it's part of a larger ecosystem. I think people often look to the design world to answer that question. And my answer really is, I think the design world is 1,000% behind wanting to make a lot of those changes. But we just don't have the fuel to help, make them happen.
We would love to stay here forever with you, because every time you talk, you're very passionate. You see the passion coming out of you everywhere, from your eyes to your mouth. Now, if I take a massive white canvas and put it on top of the Empire State Building, what message would you write in there?
What message would I write on the entire, on the top of the Empire State Building? I think I would say probably something sort of simple, which is just be happy. I think simplicity is the key. Find your happiness.